stocks, bonds, ETFs, straight out of downtown Chicago. This is Zacks Market Edge.
Welcome to the Zacks Market Edge podcast, the podcast about investing in your life. I'm your host, Tracy Brynick, and this week I'm joined by Zacks stock strategist David Bartosiak to talk about an important topic, Tesla. But ahead of that, I wanted to just comment that this is our 400th episode of the Zacks Market Edge. I can't remember the exact date. I want to say it was 2016 at some point is when all this started. Dave's been on the show many times, but I'm pleased to have him on for my 400th episode. And I'd like to thank all of you who have subscribed. If you're on Apple, if you're on SoundCloud, Spotify, Amazon Music, whatever platform, or if you're watching these newer video podcasts on YouTube, thank you. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for leaving comments and recommending us, giving us the thumbs up. If you're on YouTube, I appreciate all of that because it gets the podcast out to even more people than we already have. So thanks for sticking around and sticking with us. Okay, Dave, I invited you on to talk about Tesla, but when I invited you on last week, they had their earnings. So we were maybe going to be talking somewhat about that and what they announced then. But even more news has happened since the earnings. We have Elon Musk, who apparently ditched a trip to India to divert over to China. And apparently he's over there talking with them about FSD, which is the full FSD, full self-driving. That's the software they have that is a key component of Tesla and in Teslas and may lead to Robo Taxis and things like that. And then they did another round of layoffs, and this time only on the corporate side, apparently eliminating the Supercharger unit and some that dealt with government relations. And this all happened kind of overnight. He sent an email to those teams. So it seems like there's, a lot going on at Tesla right now, as is somewhat common with Elon Musk and his businesses. Being a user of Twitter, or X as it's now called, we all know kind of what went on over there. But I want to do this episode because there are a lot of people who've owned Tesla for a long time. A lot of people who are big fans of Elon and what he's done there. They may own the car. Maybe they own a Cybertruck now, or they're on the wait list for one of those. And, they bought in big on the EV revolution, and Elon is the leader of that. And now they're waiting for the Robotaxi, but the shares are down big just this year. And they're very volatile right now. A lot of people might be wondering, what should I do? Should I be holding on to this? Should I buy more? What kind of things should I do? And maybe there's some people who have never owned it, like myself, who maybe are thinking maybe I should buy some when there's all this stuff going on. So I've brought you in with your expertise because you are our car expert here at Zacks. We've talked about Tesla numerous times before, but this seems kind of like an inflection point to me in the company.
It does feel that way. And if you're looking at their last quarterly report, the numbers kind of show that too. So, and then the stocks chart obviously has reeled in considerably. So there's so much to unpack for Tesla. And it's like the market is starting to look at Tesla like a car company almost, right? Which is, it's funny because it is a car company. But there's so many other layers to the Tesla bull case that we've talked about, before. So it's not just making cars. So there's obviously the pie in the sky idea of the full self-driving and Robotaxis, which we're going to get into it a little bit. But then there's just the overall EV infrastructure part of this too, right? The power infrastructure part. So the utopian idea of like, you have solar panels on your roof that get stored in your power wall. You plug in your Model 3 or whichever number we're going to be on in the future. And then while you're sleeping, it goes out in the middle of the night and operates as a Robotaxi for you. And you make money, right? So that's kind of the big utopian idea. In practice, is it, are we ever really going to get there? Maybe not. Maybe we will. Who knows? But at least there's a vision, right? So there is a vision and a direction of where Tesla is going and where they want to be. So that's a good thing. I think a lot of the questions around them right now are not whether or not they have these goals, but are they getting closer to achieving those goals? And when you see things like layoffs coming over there, and when you see revenues down year over year, you're talking 13% year over year drop in total automotive revenues for Tesla. This is supposed to be a growthy company. So when you see that, obviously that's a big problem. And if you look on the earnings side, we've seen earnings roll over too, in line with those revenues, of course, as expenses have ticked on up. Now, some of that is R&D. A lot of that obviously is, trying to get this FSD going. So there's a lot. And if you're a long-term investor, you got to still be with that bull case. You got to understand where the company would like to go, because where you're at right now doesn't feel so great, right?
No, I'm not even a shareholder, and I'm kind of mad at them right now.
Mad at the company or mad at Elon?
Well, kind of both, because I feel like they were given a lot of advantages and they seem to be dropping the ball on some of them. Like, for instance, the Supercharger. So, they created that network. That's a huge, first in advantage for them. And the other car companies wanted in. They all wanted to join in on that because they didn't want to create it themselves. Tesla already had the, technology capabilities, all that. This could be a way to get like subscription revenue, basically. They build out that, they let the other cars use their network, they get a cut of it. And that's easy money. That's kind of what you like out of the big tech companies. The same kind of thing happens. But now I'm a little bit suspect when they are eliminating seemingly a big chunk of that whole segment from the company, including the one person who led it. And so that makes me rethink, like, maybe, the Supercharger, maybe it wasn't bringing in the kind of subscription revenue that they thought it was going to do, but maybe it just needs a couple more years until more and more people adopt the EVs. And then we're all docking, supercharging at their stations. So that gives me a little bit of a pause when I read, about that kind of layoff in an area I thought was going to be a driver. It might have been a small driver, but still would have been a nice source of continuing revenue for them.
Well, they're not like axing the whole program, right? They're trimming.
No, there's been no indication of that.
Yeah, so that could be more of a, getting leaner and meaner, which when Meta did it, we were all cheering. And that's when the stock really started to bounce, is when they announced their layoffs. But when Tesla does it, we think it's a bad thing. But I think that's because of sort of the aura that Tesla was, right? So now we're faced with the reality of the current situation, and maybe he does need to trim some fat. Maybe they do need to get leaner and meaner and start going. Maybe it's carrying over from what Elon did with Twitter, right? He came in and got rid of a bunch of people, and they've emerged leaner and more profitable. Although it's a privately held company now, right? So we don't really know what's happening.
Right. So we don't really know for sure what's going on over there.
Still, we do know what's going on with Tesla. And why don't we, I guess, from a Zacks standpoint, show why this is we have it as a number 5, a Zacks ranked number 5 strong sell right now in Tesla. And the reasons for that are a couple of things. First, the easiest way to show this is the price consensus and EPS surprise chart on Zacks.com. It's my favorite chart, really, because you get so much information from just one chart. So the black line on the chart is the stock's price, which correlates with or corresponds with the right y-axis. The multicolored lines are the evolution of our Zacks consensus estimates over time. So you can see how throughout 2020 and 2021, there was a constant increase in these earnings estimates for the company. And it should come as no surprise that while that was happening, the stock is pushing higher, getting over $400 into November of 2021. So really, really bullish moves there. And then I think it started to roll over. Q4 2022. So when you start to see these estimates roll over and come down, and throughout this year, it's been an overpromise and an underdeliver for EPS coming from Tesla. And you see that shares have struggled too. And now we're here at...
And then, yeah. I also see the 3 red arrows there, recent.
Yeah.
So in the years, you were just talking about 2020, 2021, when those earnings estimates were on the rise and the analysts had to keep raising to keep up. There were a lot of big green arrows there, which means they were beating big.
Big beats.
And then the stock was going up. And now we have 3 misses in a row. They're not huge misses, it doesn't look like, but
misses nonetheless. And with the numbers moving in the opposite direction, which isn't good. And one thing that I know we talked about before we got on the call, or you mentioned that, where are the real new models and the excitement? Getting back to the car company side of this, where are those new models? The life cycle of models nowadays is really short. I mean, you used to be able to have a model that you had the same platform, but you would tweak it a little bit, every year, but you could have it for 10 years. And now that's shrank down to 3 or 4, really, before you need to do, a major facelift or just a whole new platform altogether for a new model. So, we've seen, if you've seen a Model S on the road, it's kind of looked the same for, several years now. And you do have the Y and the 3 that have come out, but those are, just kind of variations on that. There's nothing that, and of course the Cybertruck, but the Cybertruck almost feels more gimmicky than anything. This is like the Instagram favorite now, right? Like we're not all in Calabasas, and we're not, rocking our Cybertrucks, down Rodeo Drive. It's just, I don't know that you're going to see that in Middle America. So it's no F-150, and even when you look at like the all electric F-150s, and those haven't been successful, right? And they're having problems with that over at Ford. So Tesla has a secret sauce, and they have that loyalty, but I don't think it's going to be as mainstream as perhaps they need it to be. If they're going to hit some of these longer term goals, just on the car side, right? On the car layer of the Tesla cake.
So what's your take on their announcement in the last earnings report about making the cheap car, which everybody has wanted them to make for a while now, but that they're keeping it on the same platform as the old car because that will save them time and costs?
Yeah, so I think there's a huge need in the automotive marketplace for a very inexpensive, reliable cars, right? That's why Hondas became so popular, over time.
Yeah. Or the Corolla.
Right, or the Toyota, the cheap Toyotas. But even those now have gotten pretty expensive, right? But because this is an EV, we're hoping that the technology to make it gets cheaper and cheaper. I mean, think about how much a big screen TV was in the 80s, right? Versus the 85-inch panels that you can get nowadays, just a few $100, right? So the same thing should happen to cars, where the more we produce these very highly technological cars that rely on just electronics, especially an EV, that it should get cheaper and cheaper to where they can manufacture it very cheap. And then you could have a no frills kind of car, that you're not going to pay that much for. We've seen that happen in other markets, but we really haven't seen it here in the US yet. Tata makes some very cheap cars over in India, right? The Chinese have EVs over there that are really cheap too, but it just hasn't gone here yet. But we've seen those prices come down on the Model 3, on all the Tesla models as new cars. And then the used market, they're really coming down too, like a lot. And one of the hottest areas of the US, of our domestic auto market, has been these very inexpensive EVs. So people aren't going out and buying them straight away when they're new, but once they've lost 40% of their value, or 50%, sometimes more in some cases, it's easy for people to go ahead and buy those and still get their tax credit too, which is the other thing. You still get the tax credit if you buy a used EV. So these are all I mean, that's all an opportunity for Tesla, but at what cost, right? Are they still going to be able to pump the money that they need into all this R&D, specifically with the the FSD that they're working on? I don't know. And then there's the other thing of the idea that we're all going to love full self-driving. Like, my mom is nervous about using the cruise control sometimes. Okay, right?
Right.
I don't want to like relinquish that control. So to just do, to think that everybody's going to just adopt this full self-driving all of a sudden, it's just not going to happen. It's going to take like literally a generation before that happens. It's not going to be all at once. There may be pockets of the country that does it more than others. If I'm in downtown Chicago, I'll hop in a Robotaxi and go wherever. I don't care. But if I've got to go, an hour somewhere that's 60 miles away, am I going to hop in a Robotaxi and just trust that it's going to get me there?
I don't know. Just depend on what climate you live in and all of that stuff too.
Yeah.
To some
So
extent.
I've had cars with like Cadillac has a Super Cruise on it, right? So I've driven the Super Cruise on the highway, and as long as it's a nice sunny day and all my sensors are nice and clean, I'm like comfortable in a car like that. But if it's raining, I'm like, I don't know if I want the robot to take over if it's raining. And that's me as a relatively well-educated, consumer that still is hesitant about that. So how are people going to feel about just letting, the robot take the wheel and take them where they need to go? It's going to take a while. I think it's really going to take a long time.
What do you feel about the Robotaxi side of the business then? Because we're apparently getting some kind of announcement in August about it.
Yeah, I think that there are some people out there completely sensationalizing how large that market actually is. So, for example, I think I saw Kathy Wood estimates that Robotaxis will generate 8 to 10 trillion in revenue globally. Those are her numbers. I've seen other forecasts calling for like 50 billion, right? Like much, much smaller. And one thing I do is, like, if you look at, Uber's revenue, right? All of Uber sales, $37 billion, right? So, and I think if you have a robot in the situation, you're going to expect those prices are going to end up coming down, because then you don't really have to pay the human, right, as any part of this. You don't need to have the middleman, which is Uber, being a part of this. So that's gonna create much more efficient robo taxis, I think, in the future. And if I'm Uber, I'm terrified right now. I think also, unless they want to buy a bunch of robo taxis and have them going, I don't know. And I don't know, maybe Tesla could provide a model for them that makes sense for everybody, some kind of revenue share with that. I'm not sure. Those are questions for much smarter people than me about how they're going to figure that out. But I think it's definitely, we've all seen Demolition Man, right? We've all seen these a Total Recall, like all these movies in the future where we're going to have these robo taxis driving us everywhere, which I think people are all for. And that's kind of why, even when I remember when Uber started disrupting the taxi business, when they were operating, I think did they launch in like Boston and San Francisco or something like that? And I remember when you just were able to get them in Chicago the first time. And it was like the coolest thing ever because you didn't have to be in that taxi cab that was really most of the time wasn't a great experience in the back of a taxi cab. And then when Uber first started, everything was so nice and clean and great. The experience was so good that you were just like, oh man, this is the best. So you're going to have a similar sort of aha moment in the beginning of the Robotaxi when you're sitting in there and like, oh my gosh, it's so cool. The Robotaxi took me from A to B. But eventually that kind of wears off. And you're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, it was cool. But, the appeal of it, I think, will start to dwindle a little bit. Unless it's, the most efficient and best thing ever and there's never any problems, right? But, how often do you have to restart your phone because something's not working properly?
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people are concerned about, a hack happening or something while you're in there. What if you get locked in the car somehow?
Yeah.
There's nobody there. What about some kind of like, flat tire or something like that? Like what happens? I don't know.
Well, Goodyear's been working on tires that don't have any air in them. So that sort of flat tire situation wouldn't even exist.
Okay, good.
Nice.
Nice.
They did that with I don't know if you saw the basketball too. There's a basketball. I think Spalding made it where it doesn't have any air in it.
No, I didn't hear about this. Wow. Okay, cool.
So that technology is kind of around. So, probably by the time that these Robotaxis are really up and running, I mean, they have them, obviously there's like some beta testing going around out there, but, to unroll them globally is going to take a little bit longer than most people think.
And what about like the data that's needed to actually run these robotaxis? Because it's a lot, which is why Tesla has the first in advantage again on that, because it's got all of its drivers, doing the beta testing on that technology, or many of them are at least. They can turn it on, and they're accumulating all this data while that's happening. But that data needs, that needs the chips, it needs the data centers to run. So does this mean Tesla's going to have its own contingent of data centers like throughout every continent, basically, where if you're going to eliminate the Ubers and the Lyfts and have those turn into some kind of Tesla Robotaxi thing, that's a lot of data going around. So, how are they going to manage that aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for them, the data that they have now is priceless. They have more, by a magnitude than any other auto manufacturer out there. So they're definitely, it's definitely a huge advantage from them. An advantage and a little bit of a liability. But I think having to worry about the data centers is probably it's probably the least of their worries, I think, right now, because the data centers, everything's constantly upgrading in that whole industry anyway. So as those costs continue to come down, it'll be less of a burden. Even though obviously the sheer amount of data is going to just exploding exponentially, every year pretty much. But I like where they're at with that, and then they could use that to license to other companies. I think Elon, you see him in interviews, and he's like, why hasn't Ford just come to us and say, hey, let us license this technology from you, which is another part of the full self-driving, right? That they're all hoping. But right now, everybody's kind of trying to do it. Let's go ahead and do it their way. Everybody's trying to do it their own way until there's a clear-cut victor, and it might take legislation to determine on who that victor is. If they come and say that this is going to be the standard. And so these are, a lot of the risks that you have involved in Tesla right now. But, there's always been these risks in Tesla, and, people are still long and strong, hoping that Elon can deliver, and it's $590 billion market cap right now on Tesla. So it's definitely, it used to be in the $1 trillion club, and it's sort of been lopped off recently. So
yeah, it's fallen out of the top 10 in the S&P 500 now. It's no longer number 7 to be in the Mag 7.
Yeah.
It's been replaced by the old economy, by Berkshire Hathaway.
Mm.
It's replaced it. I think that's kind of amusing.
And also, I just want to touch on the technical chart real quick for Tesla. Just this recent move, right? So off the lows, we got this big spike up on earnings, and already today here we're starting to. Well, the spike up happened on earnings, and then we had follow through with yesterday's news of the deal with Baidu over in China, and now that gap looks like it's going to get filled, meaning the stock looks like it wants to retreat here a little bit. Fill that gap and test this 50-day moving average, which is down at 175. That's probably a great place to enter if you're a long-term bull on the company. Wait for that, pull back another $10 that you'll probably get, because gaps love to be filled. And if you see even like the gap down in January, eventually that got filled before the stock headed lower. So when you get this gap up, the stock has a tendency to come down and fill that gap. Now, the gap really started from 172. 50-day right now is at 175. So you might get a little intraday action down below it. But the overall, I think, the overall trend of Tesla is definitely to the downside. I mean, if you can look from when we were up at $400, there's been sort of a series of lower highs that have come in, which isn't the greatest thing for the long-term investor. But you could certainly see a turnaround here around this 50-day. I mean, if you look back in January 23, similar situation where the stock's underneath that 50-day for a while, kind of gaps up, rallies, comes back to retest, and eventually finds its way higher. After a little bit of failure at that level, it still finds its way higher. And then now with this 50-day under this 200, we're sort of in a downtrend right now. But this is an area where it could reverse. So if you're a long-term investor in Tesla, you should be happy about this, because you can continue to add shares down here a little bit cheaper, and then when things turn around, it'll look better, right? But we're going to need to see those, from Zacks' standpoint, we're going to need to see those estimates tick higher before it gets shifted from its current Zacks rank.
Right. It'll stay, as a number 4 sell or a number 5 strong sell until we get revisions in the earnings estimates that are more positive.
Yeah, I mean, following that last report, we had 10 analysts come out and cut their estimates for the current year and next year. So our Zacks consensus estimate went from 344 this year to 248, and next year's numbers off from 461 to 329. So we're still expecting earnings growth next year, and that's on 14% revenue growth that they're hoping for next year.
We'll see if they roll out the cheap car, like they said, and even just what the appetite is from the consumer to buy EVs as we go through this year and into next year. And if maybe some of those financing options come down, right now, a lot of people are getting hammered on, they're taking out a car loan. That's expensive. So a lot of balls in the air here with Tesla, as we all know, as there always is, it seems, but does seem a lot right now. One other question I had for you about the Robotaxi. So I keep hearing, people saying, like, if you own a Tesla, you could literally send it out there to go be a Robotaxi on your behalf and make money. But, and I'm sure there's some people who will do that if we get to that capabilities. But there was a business that had the where you could rent a car. Like I own the car, I could put it on the app, I could rent it like an Airbnb for cars. And
Turo.
Yes, that one. And is it still around? I think it might still be.
Yeah.
But it never really caught on as big as what everybody thought it was going to catch on. And I don't know if that's because people didn't want to rent out their own car or what. I know in some vacation destinations, though, I've had friends who have rented it in those locations successfully, and there were a decent number to choose from there. But do you really think a lot of people will be renting out their own Tesla or whatever car might have this kind of technology on it?
So it's I don't think as many people will as they believe will. There's something really I mean, okay, of course I'm sick in the head, right? I have like a car thing. I love cars. So I would never, I don't even like it when my wife drives my car. Okay. So I would never just be like, yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead. Just take my car and just destroy it. Cause that's all you think of is, okay, how many curbs are we going to have? Well, I guess if the Robotaxi is driving, it's different, right? But there's just something like, it's your car. Humans still like covet things that are theirs, and it's still, it's your car is still a person. People still have personal connections to their cars. Now there are people that don't care at all, have no personal connection to a car. It's just the utilitarian aspect of it gets them from A to B, and that's it. For those people, that's going to be great, right? Having a Robotaxi that goes off and does whatever. But I think for a lot of people, they're not going to be comfortable with that. Plus, you don't know what the condition of the car is going to be when it comes back. People don't like hassles, and that's why Turo, I think, hasn't taken off as much as they wanted to, because you still have the hassle. Okay, even if I'm renting a Turo, right? Now I got to make sure that, like, I got to meet this stranger, right? I got to go see the car. I got to make sure that they're not going to, bang me up for something if there's one little thing that's wrong with the car or not right with the car. They're going to try to blame me for it. There's still this introduction of hassle that comes with that, and people don't like that. So how are you going to eliminate that hassle with the Robotaxi? I think that hassle is still very much going to be there if you're talking about your own one that's going out.
Do you think we could see like a rash of cameras being placed in there to make sure whatever damage is done, like there's a record of it?
You absolutely would need it in there, no question. Plus, I mean, the insurance side of things. If there's damage done, because there will be damage done, people are gonna,
for sure,
you're gonna scratch up the seat or tear the seat, like that's going to happen.
Yeah, I drive a lot of zip cars still, so I know how those are, and I tend to drive the same car for a number of years before they swap it out with a new version. So I've seen kind of the wear and tear and things that go on in the zip cars, and that's with no human is in there, obviously. So it would be similar to like a Robo Taxi where there's no one really watching you. So yeah.
I mean, I think that. And the other part here on Tesla that we haven't talked about yet is, what about the Semi? That's supposed to revolutionize the trucking industry, and we're still in pilot production on that one. But that's probably the next one. That's probably the next thing. In addition to the cheap car, but you get that Semi working, then now that's a whole new industry that you can disrupt, that you can go after. So, but then it's just a question of again, it's still an adoption of that too, adoption of the Semi, and what you can trust with that. So I don't know.
Okay, so for those who are long-term investors, some of the advice we've given on this podcast over the years is pertinent to this podcast as well, and that is you should always have a goal for whatever it is you're investing in. Why did you buy Tesla stock? What is your intention? What's your goal for that money and that investment? So that may give you a little bit more clarity when things are volatile and the stock might not be going the same way you hope it would. So keep that in mind. Also, make sure you're following along on the news always, and you know what's going on there, because information is power always. One of the pieces of advice we've given a lot over the years is that if you can't sleep at night because of a stock investment, then it's probably not the right thing for you. So you shouldn't be stressed out and, anxious over your investments. So keep that in mind as a little bit of a clue as to how you're feeling. because not everybody needs to be in all the stocks, that are popular or out there, and they're not for everybody and for that person's goals. Someone may have a different goal for their investment. Maybe they want to trade Tesla and not own it long term. There's different goals there. So keep that in mind. Any other advice you would have, Dave, for people who are in it right now? You gave some earlier about maybe adding to your position.
Yeah, I think, you find companies that you believe in their long-term future and you systematically invest in them. And when they're down off their highs, the stock's on sale, you should be happily buying more. If something changes to your long-term fundamental outlook on the company, that's when you have to reassess your investment. So the detractors from Tesla, people have heard those for years and years and years. This isn't really anything new. So I think the long-term Tesla bulls are going to stand in there and be rewarded, and the bearishness will end up subsiding, I think. But just right now, there are risks, and that is why the stock is down. That's simple.
Yeah, that's a good way to end our podcast today. Okay, so we did talk about Tesla. The ticker, in case you don't know, is TS as in Sam, L as in Larry, A, TSLA. We did mention Uber, which shares were down when they made the announcement about the Robotaxi in August. And that ticker is UBER, the same name. So yes, be sure to subscribe so you are able to get all of our podcasts as we move forward. This was the 400th episode. There's many more to come. You can get our old episodes, some of our good video podcasts on YouTube. Go over there at zacks.com/YouTube to get all of our video content, but the video podcasts are there as well. And be sure to subscribe, as I said, on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, and I'll see you again next week with some more stocks.